Good evening. My name is Jan Wong. I'm a journalist, a retired journalism professor, and an author of 6 nonfiction bestsellers, including one about the impact of an NDA. I live in Toronto, so why am I speaking to a committee of the Manitoba legislature? Well, because NDAs affect all of us. And in my case, NDAs have harmed me both professionally and personally. As a journalist, I've worked for 5 newspapers, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Globe and Mail. My work took me around the world and across Canada, including to Manitoba. I was also the Globe's China correspondent during the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. NDAs affect public discourse, freedom of the press, and freedom of information. In short, they affect the health of our democracy. And I have a Manitoba example for you. I wrote a column at the Globe and Mail, which people really liked, called Lunch With. I had a lot of fun with it. And my first lunch date was Peter Nygard. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that he was the Manitoba businessman who manufactured women's clothing. But why would I start the lunch column with Peter Nygard? Well, because I'd heard about 3 sexual harassment complaints about Nygard filed 1 year earlier in 1996 at the Manitoba Human Rights Commission. When I asked Nygard during our lunch about the sexual harassment settlements and other unpleasant topics, he terminated the interview and he threatened to sue me. My nervous editors made me re-interview my sources and extract written promises from them that they would testify on the Globe's behalf if we got sued. It took me 6 months to satisfy the Globe's lawyers. Everyone cooperated, except, of course, the 3 women who had filed the harassment complaints. That incident shrank to a very few sentences in the column, and I could only report on Nygard's version of events. Why? Because the 3 women had settled. The Human Rights Commission then did not proceed with the case, and the women all signed non-disclosure agreements. That was in 1997. Nygard was then 56, and today he's 80. In the ensuing quarter century, he assaulted multiple women and girls in the US, Canada, and the Bahamas. Canadian and US authorities have accused him of sex trafficking and racketeering. Nygard denies all these accusations. He's now in a jail cell in Toronto, where a judge recently denied him bail. He's subject to a detention order in Manitoba. He's facing 6 counts of sexual assault and 3 of forcible confinement in Toronto, more charges in Quebec. He faces extradition to the US once his court case finishes in Toronto. And again, I say he denies all these accusations. Now imagine a world without NDAs, where the victims are not gagged. Imagine a quarter century ago if those 3 brave women who went to the Manitoba Human Rights Commission could have spoken freely to me. This is the damage of NDAs. It gives free rein to predators. It creates more victims and more ruined lives. And now, in the few minutes I have left, I'd like to unpack the personal impact of an NDA on myself. In 2006, I fell sick with severe clinical depression after I reported a story and suffered death threats and racist attacks. My employer, the Globe and Mail, didn't believe I was sick, despite detailed medical notes and reports from my family doctor, my psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist hired by the insurer, Manulife. By the way, I've never been able to say Manulife's name in public after settling with them, after 6 months after I settled with them. They said that they would pay me the benefits that they had withheld with the encouragement of my employer, but I could never again mention their name. So I really appreciate the parliamentary privilege afforded by this committee. From the very start, back in 2006, when I fell sick, the Globe and Mail wanted to get rid of me. It offered me 2 years' salary as a settlement, but I wouldn't take it because they wanted an NDA. As a journalist, and like any human being, I wanted to speak. I had to speak. I knew I would never recover from my clinical depression if I was gagged. I had to write about my experience with mental illness. So after months and months of mediation and arbitration, like Shannon Hancock, the first person to speak tonight, the nurse who spoke first, I contemplated suicide. But then the globe seemed to cave. I was free to tell my story. The memorandum of agreement I signed gave me the explicit right to tell my story. But at the bottom of the memorandum of agreement, the lawyers added an NDA. Now, I was very sick, and I was not allowed to have a lawyer in the room. So I didn't really get it. I thought, well, they said I could tell my story, so I'm going to sign it. It was a Kafkaesque document that gave me the right to tell my story while simultaneously imposing an NDA on me forever. It was also a one-sided NDA. It muzzled me, the little guy, with severe penalties if I broke it. But there were no penalties for the big guy. The Globe could violate the deal at will. The NDA was one-sided, designed only to muzzle the employee. So without any penalty for the Globe and Mail in this document, it reneged on its promise to let me tell my story. I had a contract with my longtime publisher, Doubleday Canada, which had previously published my first 4 books. The Globe and Mail interfered, and Doubleday dropped my book. It was essentially finished. It was on its way to copy edit. It was so sudden that Doubleday still owed me 2 author payments. And get this, before Doubleday would send me the checks, it wanted me to sign an NDA. But by then I was beginning to figure things out. And I told Doubleday I would not sign an NDA. And the longer they took to send me my money, the better my epilogue. So they sent me the money. Of course, that was the end of my relationship with Doubleday, which is part of Random House and Penguin. It's the biggest publishing conglomerate in Canada. And I have since published a book with a much smaller publisher in Atlantic Canada. So there's a direct financial impact of NDAs, but there was an even bigger financial penalty to come for me. I wrote this book. I'll just hold it up. I don't consider it a prop. This is the book, Out of the Blue. A memoir of workplace depression, recovery, redemption, and yes, happiness. I was very careful not to disclose the fact that I had received 2 years severance. Of course, I mentioned the fact that we had settled. It's part of the story. And I wrote that I had received, quote, a big fat check. Now, as a former business reporter, I know I disclosed nothing about the amount. If I asked 5 of you on the committee, write down on a piece of paper how much the big fat check was, I guarantee you all 5 numbers would be different. But after this book made the Globe and Mail's own bestseller list, its lawyers dragged me back into arbitration and then into court. I lost. I also made case law. No employee in Canadian history has ever had to pay back such a large sum to a former employer who had, please note, had already fired me. How much did I have to pay? $210,000. The upside was I was finally free to tell the world all the details of the memorandum of agreement. But guess what? I haven't been able to write about it. With the help of my doctors, I recovered my clinical depression. I went on to a productive 10-year career as a journalism professor in Fredericton, New Brunswick. For 10 years, I've tried to write about this. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I retired and I had nothing to do and I still couldn't write about this. And I tell you this to show you the immense psychological damage that an NDA causes. Even after I was free to talk, after I repaid the Globe, every penny, I still didn't feel free. I have never before in my career faced writer's block. And it recently dawned on me I must be suffering some kind of PTSD. In closing, I have to say that as a former China correspondent, there's something eerily, creepily familiar about this feeling of suffocation. In Beijing, I was under surveillance. Every word I wrote, everything I said was monitored. And as I was preparing my remarks for you tonight, I realized that an NDA is like having the Chinese Communist Party controlling your speech for the rest of your life. It isn't just predators like Peter Nygard or employers like the Globe and Mail or my insurer or the Manitoba Nurses Association or Fox News. Even my small liberal arts University in Atlantic Canada required me to sign as a condition of employment a blanket non-disclosure. I have just 2 more sentences. I know my time has run out. Is that all right? Can I just finish?
Yeah, leave has been granted. Go ahead. Ms.
Thank
Wong?
you. As Professor McFarlane has noted, NDAs have invaded every sector of our life in Canada. They are spreading like COVID. This blight on our democracy can end with your help. I urge you to pass Bill 225, and thank you for listening.
Ms. Wong, thank you for your presentation. We do sincerely appreciate it. We'll just have 5 minutes of questions now. No question is more than 30 seconds. Are there any questions? Mr. Lamont, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Wong. I appreciate your testimony. I do find it, like, I am speechless in some ways about your treatment by, I mean, the Globe and Mail is Canada's paper of record. Did they ever justify? Could they ever explain their behavior or why they wanted an NDA from you?
Ms. Wong.
No, they didn't. I dealt with their lawyers, and there was management from the newsroom. I think they said, well, I know the arbitrator mediator said, well, why would they pay you if you're just going to talk about it? And so this is an important point I want to make to the committee. When people are fired, or they are abused, or they are sexually assaulted, or they are harassed, the payment is for the bad behavior. As legislators, I hope that you will not allow any more to have payment for silence. They make these two elements sort of be the same thing. And it's so important that they have to pay because they treated you badly. I mean, I was clinically depressed and they fired me. So there is a severance that they have to pay. I mean, maybe they were tired of me, but I was a star reporter. But fine, as the employer, she said modestly, no, but they have the right to fire you. They have to pay severance if there's no cause. There was no cause. But don't elide this with a gag order, a permanent lifetime gag order. And I think it's very important to understand this is what we're trying to get across, that an NDA cannot be used, cannot be tied up with a deal.
Are there any other questions? Ms. Naylor.
I just want to thank you wholeheartedly, Ms. Wong, for sharing your story with us tonight. There's something very important that I heard from you tonight that I'm just going to ask you to kind of reiterate again or share your thoughts on this again. But in hearing about that story that you tried to write, the Peter Nygard story, what I realized is that if that story could have been told, there's perhaps hundreds of women that may not have been sexually assaulted or trafficked in the years since you weren't able to tell that story. Do you feel that that's true, or is there more do you want to say about that?
Ms. Wong.
Absolutely, you put your finger on it. I felt very upset every time I saw what was happening with Peter Nygard, because, in the year that I wrote my lunch column about him, and I tried my best to get everything in, I tried. Air Canada In-Flight magazine en route was saying, he's one of Canada's top most eligible bachelors. That was what the media was doing before. And then after I wrote my column, I was contacted by several journalists in the ensuing years who said, we understand that you had this stuff on Peter Nygard. Can you share it? I was very happy to share it. But the problem was the NDAs. We couldn't get past the NDAs. And so I'd like the committee to consider how many predators there are out there in your neighborhood, in, where your children work, where your spouses work, who are not being held to account. Basically, we want to be able to hold people to account. We don't want the rich and powerful to be able to muzzle their victims and continue, as Harvey Weinstein did and as Peter Nygard has done, blithely going on and doing it. I mean, Harvey Weinstein's really old now too, and he's finally held to account, and Peter Nygard is 80. I mean, really, we need to have a new law.
Minister Gertson, you'd signaled a question.
Well, just to again thank you. So I have to look at this. I have to sort of look at the camera in this direction, even though you're behind me, so it's all a little bit awkward. But thank you for the comments and joining us from Toronto. It's a great part of what I think we've set up virtually, is we can get perspectives from those who might not otherwise be able to be here without the virtual technology. But your perspective was unique and probably not something that I'd considered from a journalist's perspective. So I appreciate you sharing it here tonight.
Ms. Wong, if you wish to respond, I'll give you 30 seconds to do so.
Oh, that's so kind of you. I just want to thank you so much. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this, really participated in democracy. And I have to say, I'm deeply moved by the presentations of the people that preceded me. And I'm also very impressed that the committee is sitting at night, to hear us. Thank you so much for your time and your concern and your attention. I really appreciate it.